Hello, I'm Steve Hall, Senior Vice President for Advocacy at ACEC, inviting you to join us in June at the Annual Convention and Legislative Summit in Washington, D.C. The annual convention is our most important advocacy event, where ACEC's citizen lobbyists, that's you, play a critical role in educating lawmakers on top issues that affect your business. The good news is Capitol Hill is back open for business, making it easier for you to engage your House and Senate members in their offices. We need your voice to support our grassroots effort on critical issues facing the engineering industry right now, including repealing the new 5-year amortization requirement to use the R&D tax credit, workforce issues and STEM education, implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law, and other priorities. Registering for the convention also gets you access to educational sessions and our keynote speakers, including former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. I look forward to seeing you this June at the ACEC Annual Convention and Legislative Summit. Make sure to register today. Thank you.
Welcome to Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. And today I am very pleased to be joined by Congressman David Rouzer from the state of North Carolina. He is also the Subcommittee Chairman on the Water Resources and Environment Subcommittee of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And we have a good, I think it's perfect time for some conversations on infrastructure and the work that the committee is doing. And Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate the time you're taking to join us on the program.
Well, good to be with you.
Now, Congressman, we're going to have our congressional fly-in, our annual spring legislative event next month in June, about 4 weeks from the time we're recording this. And I'm sure that we're going to have a lot of members from the Tar Heel State down the halls of Capitol. But for those of our membership who are not familiar with the work that you're doing on the Hill, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and also the district you represent.
So my district is southeastern North Carolina. Wilmington is the population center of the district, and then I go further west to Lumberton and Fayetteville. And many of your listeners in the audience, I'm sure, or viewers on the podcast here, I'm sure, have been on I-95 before and cut right through Lumberton and Fayetteville. And so that basically is the western portion of the district, and then goes down to the South Carolina line all the way to the coast. I have a lot of Army Corps of Engineer issues that I deal with in my district. Of course, we have hurricanes, flood mitigation issues that we're constantly dealing with. And then a very strong agriculture sector in the district as well. And but I've been on the Hill now a total of about 17 years, 7 years with both Elizabeth Dole, U.S. Senator Elizabeth Dole, and then before that, U.S. Senator Jesse Helms. That was back in a different day and a different era. And of course, now on Capitol Hill as a member of Congress on the House side, I'm in my 9th year, my 5th term. I have been on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee the entire time, as well as the House Agriculture Committee.
And Congressman, as chair of the Water Resources Committee and working with with Chairman Graves, WRDA has been a significant piece of Army Corps legislation that Chairman Schuster worked to get that to be a biennial bill every 2 years. Consider a WRDA bill. How important right now is that on the list of the things that you need to do at the committee to get that bill done?
Well, it's a high priority, and we're going to have another bipartisan bill. Probably start working on it late this year. In the meantime, though, we're going to continue oversight as it relates to the 2020 WRDA and the 2022 WRDA bills. And of course, obviously, we'll be aiming, as I mentioned, to start work on the 2024 WRDA bill late this year, and of course we'll move into next year with that as well. Obviously, WOTUS has been a big topic for the committee. Congressman Chairman Sam Graves and I sponsored the CRA to repeal the Waters of the U.S. Rule. Got a pretty good bipartisan vote in the House and in the Senate. Obviously, not enough to override a veto, but was very proud of the effort here in Congress to push back on that very flawed rule. And then, of course, permitting reform is top on the agenda for the subcommittee as well. As part of H.R. 1, we included Section 401 reforms to tighten up that language a little bit. And looking forward to continuing those efforts as we move forward in the subcommittee this year.
And actually, you authored that part of H.R. 1, that the Water Quality Certification and Energy Projects Improvement Act that focuses in on Section 401. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what was the idea behind the bill and what you hope is going to come out of that as part of H.R. 1?
Yeah, well, Section 401 essentially had been weaponized by blue states around the country, New York and Washington, Oregon, and others. And that had been increasingly so during the course of the Trump administration. And this is when you had good energy projects that were coming online that otherwise would have been approved. And those blue states, both elected leaders and also career bureaucrats who really just had a political agenda, they were abusing some of the language in Section 401, basically using loopholes to derail projects, not because it had anything to do with water quality, which is what Section 401 is all about, but because it did not fit their political purpose, of the day. And so we basically tightened up that language to prevent that type of weaponization. Got it reported out of the subcommittee, out of committee, and then, of course, leadership decided to include that as part of the overall H.R. 1 energy package that the House passed a few weeks ago. I'm very, very pleased and proud to have that in there.
Which is important because usually the number of the bills usually shows the importance that leadership places on policy. And being part of H.R. 1, of course, means that it's an important piece of legislation for the agenda for the majority at the time. So congratulations on that.
Well, that's exactly right. We got it through the House. We'll see what the Senate does. They're likely not to do anything on it. But later on in the year, when we have a major appropriations omnibus package, maybe we can get some of those policy riders included in that and across the finish line that way. But it's very important from a legislative standpoint to have at least one body that has endorsed major reforms like we did with H.R. 1. If H.R. 1 were implemented into law today, it would unleash a tremendous amount of energy potential in this country, and people would see the effect of that. We'd be exporting more oil and gas, and that would help to drive down the price. I don't know about you, but the prices are still mighty high in my district and everywhere else I travel.
No, that's true. That's true. And I know we have a lot of firms in our industry that are ready to expand that energy infrastructure and help get more energy to more customers. So you mentioned, the WOTUS and the fact that the House resolution was by, it unfortunately came up short in the House, but at the same time, a federal judge did stay the order in about 24 states. What's next in your mind for waters of the U.S.? Where does it go from here? Is it going to play out in the courts, or is there going to be another push against the regulatory agencies?
Well, I think you're going to see most of the action in the courts moving forward. Speaking of that particular lawsuit, I wish that the state of North Carolina had been one of the signatories to that lawsuit, so therefore we wouldn't have to deal with this new WOTUS rule in North Carolina either, but that's not the case. So here you have an example of the murkiness, the muddiness of this issue, no pun intended there. But you got half the country that has to abide by it, the other half of the country that does not. And one of the major flaws of the rule, it's basically the Obama rule of 2015, but it's cloaked a little differently, so it would appear to be nicer, appear to be a little gentler, appear to be a little more workable for folks out there. But in reality, it's not going to be. And that's because it's too subjective. The definition is too subjective, is too wide ranging, and any bureaucrat could take any look at it any day and come to a different conclusion, and that's problematic. I've always believed that rules and regulations are important. You need good guidance on the road, so to speak. Everybody needs to know what the rules of the road are. But you don't need ambiguity. You don't need subjectiveness. You don't need a stop sign every 10 feet. And that, unfortunately, is what type of regulatory quagmire this rule would bring about, and already is bringing about. This is an issue that's been litigated for years. There needs to be some clarity brought to the table. I do think that the case before the U.S. Supreme Court, Sackett versus the EPA, the Sackett family versus the EPA. I think the Supreme Court will have a ruling that's somewhat favorable. I say somewhat because I'm not necessarily anticipating a clear, concise win. I think it will be somewhat nuanced, but I do think it will be helpful. And then, of course, we'll see what happens with the lawsuit that the states have brought. Where you got basically, 24 states in the union that currently don't have to abide by it because of the judge's ruling. So we'll see where that goes. And then in the meantime, we'll continue in Congress, to see what we can do to mitigate the effects of the rule and the implementation of the rule. When we have an appropriations bill later on this year, I expect that, we'll try to include a policy rider there stating that no money shall be used to implement the new rule. And so, we'll be able to do some small things like that in the end could end up being very, very helpful in the long run. But I don't see a major point of clarity on this unless the U.S. Supreme Court has a very clean cut, straightforward, great ruling on Sackett versus EPA, which is possible. But again, I'm not necessarily expecting that. I think it'd be more nuanced. And but if I'm wrong and they do have a clear, concise, ruling, that will help tremendously. And then, the administration's going to have to take that ruling into account and go back and rework their rule anyway. So maybe the fact that we've had a strong bipartisan vote in the House and the Senate actually got the bill to the president's desk, even though he vetoed it. Maybe that will have some sway in encouraging the administration to be a little more reasonable with this.
Well, it's something that we're watching closely, so we're eager for some action on that and just to see where it all actually does end up. I do want to pivot over to the infrastructure bill because we're in about 2 years past its enactment. Money is starting to flow. We are hearing from states that while the money is being spent at the federal level, that some states aren't moving very quickly to get it out the door. We have a lot of firms that are ready and eager to get projects started. What's your perspective in North Carolina on how the money is being spent? Do you think that more should be being done at the state or even in a federal level at the department to speed the funds? How do you see it all playing?
Well, I think a lot of that is yet to be determined. Had the bill not had so much green industry items in there, particularly the electric vehicle stations and all the focus on EVs, I think you would have seen a tremendous amount of Republican support for the infrastructure bill in the House. And of course, it had some bipartisan support, in the Senate. It takes a little while, for money to get out the door. And I'm sure, and in fact, I know the state of North Carolina is, taking a look at where they have needs and where they can utilize that. There's going to be some good things to come out of it, for the state. And, so we're just going to have to continue to follow that. When I talk to my friends in the legislature back home, I think they're waiting to see how the state plans to implement some of that. Again, it's not uncommon at all. For a bill that passes in the fall, it's never implemented in just a few months. Usually it takes a year or more for them to figure out how they want to disperse it and for what projects they want to disperse it to. But I do think there's going to be some good benefit for all the states around the country, including North Carolina. And like I said, had there not been so much of an emphasis on electric vehicles and the attitude that we got to move to electric tomorrow, no matter what the consequence, I think you would have seen pretty strong bipartisan support in both chambers of Congress.
I think that the one thing that we know from passage of the IIJA in our own research is a question of workforce and the talent available to do the work that the bill calls for. We have a research institute that found that with the bill in place, there's going to be a national shortage of just under 100,000. We're looking at about 82,000 engineers that are going to be needed to fill the jobs to get the work done. Now, this kind of goes right to something else that you've been kind of outspoken on recently. Of course, North Carolina is a great high-tech state, becoming much more so each year. And I know that you've been an advocate for STEM education, and actually you teamed up. I saw before the State of the Union with Miss USA to kind of hammer that idea home. She's a chemical engineer herself, and I noticed that you were talking about that from what you're hearing from your constituents about high quality jobs. What in your mind should we be doing to really incentivize STEM education in the United States?
Well, STEM education is really critically important, and I think we need to do a better job of advertising to our youth just how critically important science, technology, math, engineering is to our economic survival, our economic growth, and even more important than that, our standing in the world, our ability to be a leader in the world in innovation. So it's a really exciting, topic and area, and I think we need to be more assertive in promoting STEM education. And I think we also, along those lines, need to be more cognizant that there are a lot of young people today who feel like they're only a success if they go to college, if they go to a traditional liberal arts university. Whereas they could also go and get a great education in a field such as welding or electrician or plumber or any of those, brick masonry, masonry as a category in general. I mean, all those areas are areas where we need a tremendous amount of additional workforce so that the economy can grow. And so I think that's a critically important point. I was with Miss USA a few weeks ago where we were talking about the importance of STEM education. That's one of her platforms as Miss USA. And elected officials, Miss USA, Miss North Carolina, anybody who's in a role where you have access to the news media and you have access to the public airways, I think it's incumbent upon us to talk about the benefits and the importance of STEM education and just how much that means for American competitiveness, how much that means for American influence in the world. And not only that, how much it means, in terms of growing the economy and having a prosperous society here at home.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any way to amplify the message, you want to make sure to take advantage of that. And I imagine there's also, I guess, a national security component to it as well. I mean, Fayetteville is home to the ACEC Airborne and American Army Special Warfare. I mean, warfare is getting more technical, and it's with our international competitors, potential belligerents, having an educated workforce that can go toe to toe with our competitors is critically important as well, I'd imagine.
Well, no question about that. Fort Bragg is just outside of my district there. To the west, I have Camp Lejeune, which most people know it as Camp Lejeune. The family requested the change in pronunciation of the name several years ago. That's just outside of my district, technically in Greg Murphy's district. Fort Bragg's technically in Richard Hudson's district. But all of us in the North Carolina delegation are very, very supportive of our armed forces. It's a big part of our state. Of course, I have a tremendous number of veterans that live in my district, and and they have great skills that they can contribute. One of the great things we have in North Carolina is our community college system, where you can go back and be retrained or trained anew in a brand new field, and come out and be very, very successful and earn a very good paycheck too, particularly this day and time. Because employers across the board, whether they're working on military bases or whether they're civilian working on military bases or in the public at large, they have a great opportunity if they have the right skill sets. And so, again, it goes back to making sure that folks understand the importance of STEM, what it really is, and how critical it is to the survival and the prosperity of America.
Congressman, before I let you go, there is one something you mentioned early at the beginning of the program is your work on the Senate side of the Capitol as a senior policy staffer for both former Senator Jesse Helms and Elizabeth Dole. I always like to ask this of former staff who become elected members. I asked this of Peter DeFazio and some others. How did that work kind of prepare you or create kind of the perspective that you bring into your role now as an elected member, having the benefit of the experience on the staff side?
Yeah, well, I think it's a big help. I still have a lot of relationships in the U.S. Senate today, particularly at the staff level. You would be surprised at the number of staffers that were around when I was there 20 plus years ago that are still on the Hill in some capacity, or if they're not on the Hill, they're in a very strategic place in the greater Washington community, whether they're lobbying or any other endeavor, or think tank, for example. But it was a very valuable experience for me. I probably still understand the Senate better than I even understand the House, even after 4 terms now. And so that Senate knowledge has helped me, get some things across the finish line that I probably wouldn't have gotten across the finish line in my time here as a House member. And so I probably have a fuller, more appreciation for the rules of the Senate than most of my House colleagues do.
And I was talking to my colleague Dave Bender, and he mentioned that you have an event every year that kind of has a big focus on rock band cover bands, 70s, 80s. So I got to ask you, who's your favorite? Who's your favorite, let's say, 70s?
There's several. I've always been a Fleetwood Mac fan. The Eagles, they obviously, are incredible performers. I've always found Elton John to be just an incredibly talented, individual. But if I had to, pick a band from the 70s, I'd probably somewhere either Fleetwood Mac or the Eagles. I'd probably lean to Fleetwood Mac.
Strong choice, very strong choice. Congressman, thank you again for taking the time out of your day. It's getting busy on the Hill, so I appreciate the time. Thank you very so much for being part of the program, and look forward for our members to see you next month during our legislative event.
Well, good to be with you. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. And again, this has been Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. We'll see you next time.